I'm continuing my series entitled Where to Put Your Pieces, and in the first clip I looked at a game of Michael Adams, and I want to give another of his games now, and hopefully you'll notice the similarity between these two games. I think it's an excellent way of learning about positional chess by focusing on one particular player, and you start to recognize very familiar patterns, and that's certainly the case with Michael Adams, who has, well, throughout his career remained really consistent in the way he plays chess, but also with the openings he plays, and so it's much easier to divine these similar patterns. So here we go. This game is from the FIDE Knockout World Championship that took place in Libya in 2004. Those were different times. And this was in the first round of that knockout tournament, and he's playing, a far weaker player. So Hussein Asabri, who's only rated 2277, so a massive gulf in class, and it's fascinating to see how Adams deals with him. In fact, well, let's see the game. So it's a Spanish, and Asabri threatens a Berlin endgame, and Adams just keeps the tension with d3. And notice already we have seen this very familiar modest pawn chain in the center of the board in the first game as well, and it's incredible how often Adams plays with this particular pawn structure. So everything pretty normal so far, very standard Spanish moves, and Black decides to fianchetto his bishop, and that means that having done that, of course, you can see that the f5 square and h5 square are covered. So it's not going to be so useful to have the knight on g3. But Adams has played this absolutely typical Spanish maneuver of the knight. But there is another square it can go to, of course, which is e3, which does look at f5. Well, it looks at some key squares, particularly d5, actually. These, when you have a pawn on e4, then the outposts on d5 and e5, of course, very, very important. Obviously, f5 is, we'll give that a red square. That's forbidden at the moment. But just watch out for this knight. Okay, Black plays knight h5. Well, of course, this is an excellent move. Black also, has this pawn structure, and perhaps looking to play the knight into this outpost, although you have to be careful, because that could, at the moment, that could just be swiped off, and then white just gets a very nice center. So, but looks like a healthy plan to perhaps try and get in on f4, and you never know, on a good day you might be able to play f5, but of course that's risky for lots of tactical reasons. This diagonal is opened, the knight on h5 could hang. Won't go into that for the time being. Okay, bishop g5 played by Adams. Now that's a tricky little move. That is a provocative move. So right from the word go, we can see that Adams is giving his opponent a chance to go wrong. So this bishop attack can be prevented with f6, bishop f6, knight f6. All these moves can be played. So which one should Black go for? So already presenting Black with, well, not a difficult puzzle, but a slightly knotty problem. It has implications. Well, Black didn't block, but just played the queen to e8, which is a good square, of course. Now knight e3. So there we go. The knight coming to a much better square than g3, and potentially looking to play into d5. Now Black decides to get rid of this bishop, h6, so the bishop comes around to h4. Now this idea of playing the bishop out to g5 and tempting black into pushing forward with g5 is a very common idea. You see it in the Spanish, you see it in against the Reti, for example, in quite a few different openings. It's actually a big favourite idea of Magnus Carlsen. You see him playing this idea. And this bishop, you know, controls useful squares here. So black decided to get rid of it, and it kind of feels nice to push the bishop back. But g5, of course, is a terrible positional mistake, because that f5 square is now under control by the knight, and yeah, this is exactly what Adams was hoping for. Well, black took on g3. It's arguable that this might make the situation even worse, but okay, I think g5 is the culprit. Sorry, if we go back here, then, you know, a far better move would be just to play the knight into f4, and maybe the bishop comes back, and, well, the knight could come back, and you could possibly try and just swipe this bishop without compromising the kingside pawn structure. Okay, that's a different game. But g5 played. And now black plays knight e7 to cover the f5 square. Well, that's reasonable. And now here, I'm amazed that Adams didn't play bishop takes bishop. I mean, in principle, you want to exchange off those light squared bishops because they cover, potentially that bishop covers these squares. And then, of course, you want to prevent f5 and then just clamp the kingside with g4. I mean, this is actually very much as in the game. And I think that is just a really sound way for white to play. But incredibly, Adams avoids this with bishop c4. Now, this is very tricky. I mean, obviously this bishop is on a good diagonal. And Adams can still follow up with g4. Maybe he's looking to play for some kind of kingside attack. But I just think it's very interesting that he played like this. I suspect Adams wouldn't do this against a stronger opponent. But let's see what happens, because he manages to tempt his opponent into doing something a bit daft. So let's see. a5 from black, looking perhaps to play b5. So a4 prevents any counterplay by black on the queen side. Bishop e6. So black didn't like the look of this bishop and wants to exchange it off. Well, obviously white is not going to play here because that pawn would cover these squares, so positionally not very desirable. But queen b3, good move, of course. Bit of pressure here, some pressure here. Queen d7 protects the bishop. And now, okay, this is again such an interesting moment in the game. Positionally, white is better. But how do you sort of make progress? For the moment, g4 isn't on because that could be taken. You don't want to, you know, introduce complications into this position. So what would you do here? You know, take a little time out, have a little think, pause the video. What would you do? Adams just played rook d1. Well, what a cool move. So he's basically just putting his rooks on nice squares in the middle of the board and waiting for black to do something. So Adams will probably play d4 if he's given the chance, and that will put additional pressure on black's position. But in a sense, this is just a waiting move, and it pays off because black now took on c4, which I think is just disastrous. Because after pawn takes, then black is completely clamped in the middle. Black has zero counterplay on the queen side because the b5 and d5 squares are very well covered. Of course, you know, the rook stands very well on the semi-open file now, but also f5 is just too weak now. So let's see how things progressed. So b6, okay, black wanted to cover this and prevent c5, and now white can turn his attention to the king side. And after this move, I think black is lost. I think black just has absolutely no hope in this position at all. And now it's very simple. Of course, you know, white could mess around with moves like knight f5 and maybe after the trade bring the knight to e4. Yeah, but there's no need to complicate. In this position, Adams recognises that he can play it very, very simply. So he just plays his knight to h2 and brings this knight round to f5. So all he wants to do is put a knight on f5 and then we'll see what happens. So black plays the knight into f4. Of course, black is hoping that white will play g3, which will block off the knight's route to f5. But Adams just plays there first. Now black might be trying to sort of get something going on the h-file, so Adams just preempts that. There's no rush here, so he just makes sure that his king is completely safe and perhaps prepares to put a rook to the h-file. So excellent play. There was no need to rush with the knight into f5. Black plays king g6. Well, somehow one feels that this story is not going to end well for the king. Rook h1. Now here is the moment where black could make a pawn break and try to free his game. So h5 is possible. But of course, after the trade and just knight here, it's an absolutely beautiful position for white. This knight can be kicked out of f4 at any stage with this. This knight is absolutely beautiful. Don't forget the white still has possibilities to attack on the d file, maybe playing knight d5 and even sacrificing, although you know, there's no need to be too flash in this position. I mean, positionally, white is just completely winning here. There's always going to be a way through. But black played queen c6. And now it's absolutely horrible. So threatening here. g3, we'd like to push the knight back. Queen c5. Black prevents this for a moment. Obviously, again, this might be good for white to take here, but there's simply no need to complicate. Adams plays queen c2. Excellent move. Well, what he wants to do with that, you can see his queen is opposite the king. And he wants to play the rook into d5, force the queen back and then take here. And if that rook is taken, then this will open up and that's absolutely fatal. Interesting that this is basically the only tactic in the game that we've seen so far. And it's only under the surface. No tactics in this game at all. So the knight came back. Rook d5. And now the rook came back. So he's just kind of gained a move, really. Because he wants to switch the h-file. That's where the breakthrough is going to come. So if h5, then this is too late now. Because the king simply moves back and the rook switches and the attack is fatal. The queen will join as well. Black played rook e8. And now white simply doubles on the h-file. If bishop g7, you can just take and knight number 2 comes in and you take on h6. h5 played, and after this black resigned. Well, rook h6 mate is threatened, and even if that's prevented, the queen is coming over soon, and well, it's yeah, there's really nothing that black can do here. So I guess you could play this. No, it's completely hopeless. It's going to be mate very soon. You can just take, and knight number 2 comes in. So completely convincing win. I mean, a very simple win for Michael Adams. Very interesting, this moment when Adams played the bishop back to c4 instead of trading. But I think I've discovered why. If we come back to this position, now Adams played bishop g5. In an earlier game in 1996, Adams had exactly this position, and he played h3. This was against Daltov, who strong 2600 player. And watch what happens in this game. Adams, of course, puts the bishop back on c4. And after this, knight e3, watch what happens. Haha, exactly the same pawn structure. And I mean, this was another absolutely brilliant strategic game from Michael Adams. He controlled this the whole way. Maybe we'll look at that another time. Okay, more play from Michael Adams coming soon.